Good morning. I'm John Higgins. You may have seen that in the bulletin. Thank you for being here this morning. I wanted to thank Liza and Melissa for being here with me this morning as well. And for those of you that may or may not know me, a lot of times I'm hidden upstairs with the audio visual. So a lot of what I do is that I work with sound. I know, I figured you'd appreciate that. So sorry, Michael. Michael's going, oh no, what happened? So, because that does happen from time to time. I also, because this is such a rare opportunity for me to do this, I have just about every one of the volunteers with the AV here. And so I just want to thank Kevin, Mark, Michael, Sloan. Sloan was even sitting down here with his son, gave me some facial recognition, and he ran upstairs to run video for us. So thank you guys for all that you do. I appreciate it. So, I want to ask you a couple of questions here, get a little audience participation. How many of you have fathers? Raise your hand. All right, for those of you that didn't raise your hand, how many of you know someone who has a father? Raise your hand. All right, some of you are not raising your hands. We all have fathers. Okay, let's try this again. How many of you have a father? Yeah, there we go. Now I got it. I could tell. I had to get you worked up here this morning. All right. One of the things that I'd like to do this morning is celebration of Father's Day. I don't know that we've done this lately, but I just want to ask, maybe a raising of the hand, who's the newest father? And the easiest way to look for that is he's probably dozing off right now because he hadn't slept. But does anybody have a newborn? Dude, just raise your hand. Anybody got a child within the first year? Okay, that's fine. How about the oldest? I know that some of our older dads are in here. I even see a few of them. So I know we've got some dads that are somewhere in the 90 range or better. Mike Tozer raised his hand. We got Ivy Redmond. See, I think there we go. So I want to applaud our older dads. So, today is Father's Day. Today is also Conference Sunday. So this is the annual, every year, this is the annual conference, Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. Our ministers take off to Lake Junaluska, to beautiful mountainous region up around Asheville, and they deal with the business of the church each year. So they're a lot of times not here, even though I think some of them have gotten back this morning. ASP, our high schoolers left at 7 o'clock this morning and headed off for Appalachian Service Project. So a lot of them are gone. Parents may or may not be here. This is also the end of the first full week of school being let out. So a lot of our families have headed out. Maybe you're just coming back from vacation yesterday or today, trying to just catch their breaths. You know, today is the final round of the U.S. Open golf tournament. Okay? So, and it probably started, I think if I'm right, started about 11 o'clock on television. Don't know if you knew, but today Van Sherrill stood right here at 8:30 and just gave a very inspiring 8:30 worship service and sermon. At 8:45 in Jubilee, Bob Langlis just warmed everyone's hearts with the sermon. So now, right now, you're sitting here thinking to yourself, I thought Claude was going to be here. And then you're going, the U.S. Open just started at 11. And then there's a few of you that are sitting around going, does Harris Teeter have Father's Day cards? So, I just want to say to all of you, with all of that distraction, thanks for being here on Father's Day at 11 o'clock. So, when we look at Father's Day in comparison to Mother's Day, and we come to church or we celebrate at home with our families, a lot of times we look at how Mother's Day is one of those celebrations that we talk about the virtuous and godly mother, and we lift her up. But a lot of times, because of God the Father, the comparison is, do dads live up to God the Father? And as such, maybe sometimes dad gets the short end of the stick on that. It's like, well, is dad trying? Is dad working to try to be as good as God the Father? I want to take a little different tactic today, a little different approach in celebrating Father's Day. And I want to talk about the Father in all of us and how that applies to everything we do in our lives. So, a lot of times, and in every case, I guess, when we think about Father's Day, we think about ourselves as a parent to a child. But we've kind of made a shift in our society. These days, so many of us have become fathers or mothers or parents to our parents. It has become a different time because so many of us are living so much longer. And when we look at some of the, I guess what you'd call the downside to that element, we look at the fact of our aging parents that have Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, dementia, Alzheimer's. You think about a parent that falls, breaks their hip, is no longer able to be mobile, has to be cared for. You look at a parent who has a stroke, no longer can communicate with you and speak, or is completely bedridden. We have become fathers and mothers to the very people that just a few years ago were our fathers and mothers. It's a different dynamic in the world that we live in today. So we are not just looking at the little ones we care for, but we're now having to look at those that cared for us, held us and told us everything was going to be all right. I think about one of the things that I heard recently that was so powerful to me was a comment made to me was, there is nothing left for me here. I'm just ready to move on. Those are powerful statements that are made by the very people that cared for us. How do we respond to those comments? How do we respond to the aging? It's a challenge. There's no simple answer to it. We just simply apply the Father's love. As we have been taught by our parents, we apply those same standards to them. Okay, so I've given the negative, I've given the downside, I've given something to kind of bring you down. Let's look at the happy side of being a caregiver or being a parent to our parents. Let me give you a couple of little examples. Take the scenario where you're looking at your mom and you say, now Mom, since Dad passed away, I think you're probably getting a little too old to date. Did you ever think you would say that to your mother? Mom responds, I may be old, but I'm not dead. If I want to go out with Joe from Sunday school class and have a senior citizen plate special, I'm going to go do it. And if it saves me money and I'm home by 7 p.m., that's fine too. So that was a joke, guys, because typically they go out for a 5 p.m. and then they're okay. All right, I tried. So, thank you. My wife will laugh when I need her to laugh, so thank you. Here's another scenario. All right, so you come home, you walk into your living room, and you absolutely freak out because your daughter is completely arm in arm and body parts together with her boyfriend on the sofa watching TV. Okay? So you freak out. It's like, how can I get them apart? This is bothering me. So you ask your dad, what would you do in this situation? And Dad responds, what did I do? I left you alone with that no good boy that you had. 5 years later, I gave you away to that boy. You bought a house with him and had 3 grandkids for me. You turned out all right. I love my grandkids, but the jury's still out on that boy. So there's the positives of us being in an environment where we are with our parents who have aged. where generations ago they didn't have that blessing. So we can be fathers and mothers to them and have the good times as well as the bad times. So now let me transition over to what is typically a father. And I'll give you a personal example. And I want you, as I'm describing this, think of your own examples as a parent, as a father, as uncles and aunts and that sort of thing. As you all know, may or may not know, I have boy-girl twins that are now 24 years old. I'm the oldest of 3 children with a brother and sister that were several years younger than me. So you can imagine that when I had my children, having the younger brother and sister gave me the authority. I knew when I brought my kids home, I knew how to parent. I had no problem. So what I did was, first night we brought them home, I said, oh, I've got this figured out. We're going to put some bassinets at the foot of the bed, and we're going to lay them down for the night. We'll go to sleep, and if they stir once, twice maybe, we'll hear them and it'll be fine. We'll have to get up and go to the other room. So that was about 10 p.m. By 3 a.m., I'm on my knees in front of those bassinets, having already fed them 6 times, because there's 2 of them, right? And I begin a prayer, and I have to say the prayer so loud over the screams. For the love of God, would you please just let them sleep? And our loving and faithful God answered my prayer 6 months later. I'll tell you another quick story. Now, I know you can relate to that. Every one of us could relate to that story. Another story. My twins are 2.5 years old, okay? Driving them along, they're sitting in their car seats in the back of the van. And if you've ever heard the theory that twins can carry their own language, well, they actually can. So we're sitting in there, and I'm driving along, and all of a sudden, one of them just starts this gibberish, makes no sense. And then stop. The other one immediately picks up, starting the same thing, makes no sense. They go back, they go forth, back and forth, and all of a sudden they stop, and then together. You suddenly realize they're having a conversation, and it makes no sense. And they start up the conversation again. So, those are the type of stories that I absolutely adore. I also want to tell you, that was 2.5 for my twins. When my kids were about 3, I can tell you right where on I-40 I was when I was driving home from work, and I was having a conversation with God. And I said, God, it's about time. I would love to have another child. And I'm talking, not really getting a response, and all of a sudden I get this simple response. You will have 3. And that's all I got. And as I said a minute ago, the loving and faithful God always answers prayers, and 18 years later, my family merged with Michelle's, and Emily became my 3rd child. So, the beauty and the joy of being a parent, of being a father. Now let me tell you the story of a mother who became a father. There was a young couple in this church, had their first child and a son. Beautiful child, happy, brought them up in the church, shared them with their family, shared them with this church community. When that little boy was about 18 months old, father was in his car, and during a summer rainstorm was killed. At that moment, that young mom, had to also become a father. She raised up that son beautifully. She used this church community and used the fathers in this church, used the mothers in this church, and we all became parents to that child. Now that young woman, having to take care of both father and mother elements for this child, a few years down the road, found love again, married, brought a father into the home. This young man now has 2 fathers, has a stepfather who has helped raise him and guide him and nurture him. This young man is now in high school, getting his driver's license next year. He even became an Eagle Scout earlier this year through our troop. I was talking to this young man just the other week with his mom and found out that next month he has an opportunity to go to a summer camp. It's a family-based camp. He's looking forward to going to this. And when asking him about it, he said, yeah. I said, so tell me about it. What's it about? And he says, well, he said, families come and they bring their sons and their daughters. And I said, oh, that's pretty cool. I said, it's a little different than the scouting, isn't it, where it's all boys at the Boy Scouts? And he goes, yeah. And I said, so there'll be girls there. And all of a sudden, the most interesting dynamic occurred. That young man had a grin that you could not have believed, but Mom didn't share the grin all of a sudden. I got a kick out of that, to be honest with you. So, that is one of the situations where the love of the father is also through the mother. Now, let me give you one other story. A friend as a father. There was a dad that visited a local coffee shop, and a young woman would take his order, talk to her, speak to her, say hello, enjoy time with her, give pleasantries, hello, have a nice day, hope your week's going well, see you again real soon. But you know, after a couple of years, it was one day that dad walked in, got his cup of coffee, and the girl behind the counter, after taking the money, she said, can I tell you something? And the dad said, sure. She said, I'm currently 26 years old, and I'm just now getting my life back together. She said, when I was 19 and finishing my freshman year in college, I went home and I stood before my parents, and I told my parents that I had made some choices in my life that they may not agree with. And after that conversation, my parents didn't agree with me. They stopped the college tuition money, and they told me I wasn't welcome at home anymore. She said after a few months that summer, she had no money left, and for the next 2 years, she was homeless. She said all she wanted to do was to go to college, study music and art, try to become a teacher, and help others. A couple of years go by. She says, a couple of years go by, I'm now 21. I finally am getting my life back on track at the age of 21. I got a job. I was able to share an apartment with someone, and I began saving money, hoping that I'd be able to go back to school one day. She went on to say that it took 5 years before she and her parents reconciled, and that they had begun that process a few years earlier. After hearing that story, the dad, looked at her and said, you know, you honor me and you bless me with sharing your story. And I'm so glad that things have turned around for you, but I've got to ask a very simple question. What made you think I would be comfortable hearing your story? What made you think I would not respond the same way your parents did? I am your parents' age. Why do you think I would respond differently? Her response to this dad was, I didn't. I took a chance. You go to church just like my parents. But you bring your children into this coffee shop, and I sit and I watch you being a father to them, and I thought, he treats his kids the way a father should. He just loves. He just loves. That dad went around that counter, grabbed that girl, gave her a hug, and said, I am so proud of you, and know one simple thing, you are always loved. I'm the one that went around that corner, and I grabbed that girl and told her she was loved. And I told her no choice she made in her life would cause me to think any different of her. She's a child of God, and I love her. That's a father. Be it the father that's my biological child or a father of a child that we encounter every day, we must just love. That was a year ago. Everything in God's time, because this last Monday, that young woman looked at me and said, I got to say goodbye to you. And I said, really? She said, yeah, I'm leaving. She said, I got accepted at the University of Georgia this fall, and I'm going to study music and art, and I'm going to be a teacher in 3 years. That's the power of love. I wanted to tell you these stories because I know that every one of you, as you're hearing these, you're thinking of your own stories, thinking of yourselves as fathers and mothers. But where do we get these type of stories from? Where do we get the ability to love, to just love? They're instilled in us. We're born with this because God the Father gave those elements to us at birth. We are designed to love. It's simply the fact, how do we choose to use it? You know, Pastor Amy Burton made a comment here just in the last few weeks, made a comment that I thought was so simple and yet so profound. And I want to see if I can say this almost exactly how she said it. But her comment was this: the God of the Old Testament was a God of anger and vengeance. God realized that at the end of the Old Testament, that his people were not obeying him, and that his people were distancing themselves from him. They weren't listening to the anger and the vengeance. The God of the New Testament is a God of love. The God of love gave us his only Son, Jesus Christ, not to condemn us, but to save us. To save us with love. That's the difference by who we are today, by those that have come before us, is that we now are a part of God's love. The best verse to show that comes from John chapter 13, verse 34. And the writing in this is so small I can't read it, so I do have it in large print right here in front of me. So here we go. Jesus said, "So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other, just as I have loved you. You should love each other." Love, the greatest of the commandments. How many times have you told your children you love them? I'm sure you tell them every day, but I want to ask you that. How many times have you told someone in this room, told someone at work, in the community? How many times have you shown love, told love to those same people? I read an anonymous quote that I thought served best here. A father is God's image in the eyes of his children. A father is God's image in the eyes of his children. I want to ask you to do 3 things for me this week. You can start with them now, taking it on toward the end of this week. Say Happy Father's Day to somebody outside your family. Tell them you love them. Tell them you appreciate what they do. Show that same love of the Father to someone else this week. Just express that love. Give that love. Do something nice for them. And the third thing to do that we as a church community do when we show our love is what the church is doing this Saturday at 4th of July Park. We're going to be out there. You are all welcome just to eat, be, to participate, to help, or not to help, but to be there, to show the community, to show the world love. The love that we have for each other and the love that God has given us. I want to close with something that I found. Here's the quote that I found. Love increases, grown and ripens, matures, until its riches are forever. I'll say it again. Love increases, grown and ripens, matures, until its riches are forever. I consider myself very blessed. Grandfather and great-grandfather were Methodist ministers. I happened to pull out my sermon note, these sermon notes from my grandfather Higgins. I just read you his final comment from Father's Day 1964. And I read this just last night after I had finished everything I wanted to say today. And I thought, how wonderful that life circles around. How we say the same things. How they mean the same things. This Bible that I read from John, the inscription in here is from my grandfather from 1935. Very proud that I can be a part of the Father's love from so long ago, and that we each have those same histories, those same heritage from our fathers, our grandfathers. And what are we doing today? As I look around this room and I see so many children that are not on ASP, that are not somewhere else, and I see fathers sitting with their children. The fathers are doing what their fathers did before them. The Father's love. So, as I look at that quote, love increases, grown and ripens, matures, until its riches are forever. The best way that I describe that, we give love to our baby the first time we hold them. We give that child love until they have grown and ripened into adults. As we mature, that love is given to us in the same way until it reaches perfection and is returned to God to live forever. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.